patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 82 of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski. Thank you all so much for joining me this week. We've got another exciting episode, one that is, I think, very, very different from the other ones that we've done. This is another classic part 1, part 2 episode. So once again, this is part 1. If you want to listen to part 2, you can click down the link in the show notes below, or if you put it on automatic play, it should play to the next following episode for part 2. As a kind reminder, make sure to subscribe to our email list to get the latest news and notifications from our show. And also be sure to check out the Ask Our Guest feature, which was announced last week. This is a great way to really be a part of these interview episodes. And more information is in the previous episode, or just simply subscribe to our email list, and we'll have some more details for you about how to have a chance to ask a question for a future guest. Now, as I just mentioned, this episode clearly is different from the rest. This week's episode is not about policy, it's not about legislation, not about foreign policy. It's about relationships. But what kind of relationships? Perhaps relationships that are closer to home. This week's guest is Dana McLendon III. On his Instagram page, he describes himself as a professional clown, amateur subversive, and parasite by choice. Now, I don't do this at all with the other episodes that I've done so far, but I highly recommend that you watch the 7-minute video that is down below in the show notes. I guarantee it, you will not regret watching this amazing video that went viral just several years ago. Probably one of the most innovative inventions I've ever seen is perhaps the most famous matrix of all, the universal hot crazy matrix. And without further ado, pause this episode right now, go watch and enjoy that amazing video, and we'll see you in just several minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to welcome Mr. Dana McLendon on Friends and Fellow Citizens. Dana, thank you so much for coming on to our program today.
I could not be happier than to be here.
Well, this is obviously a very, very special episode because you're normally on our podcast, we talk a lot about policy issues, legislative ideas, and all the rest. But today is something a little bit different. And I as I mentioned in my introduction, I highly recommend that people listen to that short video down the show notes below. That would be a really great platform to really start our conversation today. But Dana, I just got to say, when I watched this video, I think it was about 2-3 years ago, but then I watched it again last year because I guess I was just, the idea of dating or marriage just comes up so often. But I was always wondering, who is the man behind this viral video? So I decided, I watched an interview that you did.
I don't know what your profanity rules are here, but let's just say he's just some jerk on the internet. How about that?
Well, it's just phenomenal how you're able to condense that information down so well. I honestly thought you were a professor at trade, but you obviously have a bit of a different background. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're up to nowadays.
As you said, my name is Dana McLendon. I am a trial lawyer. When I say trial lawyer, I mean anything that happens at the courthouse. So I do trials and appeals. This year I've tried, I don't know how many divorce cases handled. I don't have any idea how many misdemeanor cases. Tried a murder trial a couple months ago. Got a kidnapping case. I mean, just whatever. So I'm just a mercenary at law. Been doing it about 30 years, graduated from Vanderbilt Law School and went into practice here in Middle Tennessee and been here ever since.
Wow. Well, this certainly, the things that you mentioned certainly relevant to to the hot crazy matrix, and we're going to start with there because I just think it was so ingenious for you to come up with a matrix like that. It looks like something from a textbook almost, like the
Yeah.
best textbook I can ever imagine. So,
Yeah.
tell us about how you came up with this idea and walk us through the experience of filming it at the time in 2015.
Well, that's probably going to be a big disappointment. But so the way it evolved was I had a guy come to see me, and he was hiring me, I think, for the third time. He'd been in like three little scrapes with the law. And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, man, do you understand why you have to keep paying me and hiring me?" And he said, "Man, I guess I'm just unlucky." And I said, "No, that's not it. What do all of these things have in common? All these charges have in common?" And he struggled for a minute. I said, "It's a crazy woman." And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, but what do I do?" And I was like, "Man, I let me see if I can help you with that." And I just started noodling around on a legal pad, and I came up with I guess the original sketch, and it had it had most of what became the final bit. But the first time I drew it, it was not a bit. It was I was literally trying to show a guy how he could like not have to hire me anymore by just making better choices about the women he spent time with. Probably the only two parts that were not in the original just first brainstorm drawing were the Tiffany punchline and the tranny punchline, which is arguably the like the one, right? But
Right.
um those were organically added later while I was because after I drew it the first time, he laughed and he goes, "Man, that makes a lot more sense to me." And so I just started, like if I was sitting next to someone at the courthouse or killing time or whatever, I'd draw it and show it to them. Most people laughed, and so I just, if I had a few minutes, I'd share it with somebody. And I was doing it one time. I was showing a guy one time, and I got to the danger zone, and he put his finger on it, he tapped on it, and he said, "And Tiffany's are in the danger zone." And I was like, "Yeah, that's good," because he really meant it. He really had a crazy Tiffany problem. But I realized that the comedic genius of adding Tiffany was that, first of all, everyone knows a crazy Tiffany.
Yeah.
And second of all, Tiffany was just a mnemonic placeholder. Like your Tiffany might be named Sarah, but if I gave you a name, you just filled it in with whatever name worked for you. So that was kind of accidental genius. Later, the part about the tranny stuff actually happened sort of the way I explained it in the video. Like that's not, it was organic between me and a dude I was showing it to. And I just, you know, just riffed it and there it is. The one other thing that happened spontaneously, aside from the entire film and the entire video, was during the filming, I did not have hairdressers in the danger zone when I would do the bit on my own. And the day that we filmed what became the hyper viral video, I did not know I was going to see James. He didn't know I was coming to see him. I hadn't planned to see him. I just happened to go to court in the county where he lives. It's about an hour and a half from where I live. And if I'm over there in Camden, I stop in and I see my friends that are over there. So I got out of court. I went by, I saw James, and I don't even remember how it came up, but I think he must have said something like, "Oh, so and so's girlfriend's giving him a hard time," or whatever. And I don't even know. Anyway, I drew the bit. I showed James the bit. And he goes, "That's funny, man. You should do a video." And I said, "Okay." So he literally walked out into his filming room. It's just a classroom with a whiteboard, and turned the camera on and filmed it. And what you saw on YouTube and on wherever you saw it, Facebook and wherever else it went, what you saw was one take. There was no editing. Well, the only editing that was done was we filmed it all straight through. And then James, and when I finished doing the bit, James stepped in the camera. We filmed the intro and we filmed the exit. And what was funny was that while we were filming it, it was just me and James and then two women that worked for him, and they had no idea what we were up to. So if you listen carefully, you can hear women snickering, and they'd never seen it either. So they were seeing it for the first time, and they were trying not to laugh. And I almost broke, like, I wasn't really in character. That's just me being like, deadpan. But you can hear them snicker. And then when I was doing the bit on the whiteboard, I got to danger zone, and James from off camera yells, "And hairdressers." And I was like, "And hairdressers are in the danger zone for sure." So, and then if you saw the full 7-minute video at the end, he asked me, so is there one for men? Well, he didn't know that yet. The answer was yes. I actually do also have a very simple chart for men. So his reaction to the little bit at the end where I draw the one that women use to pick a man was completely natural. I mean, James and I have been friends for 10 years or so. So that was just two dudes goofing around, man. If we had known that it was going to go viral, we would have messed it up completely, and it wouldn't have gone viral. We would have like overproduced it and thought too much about it and had a website with t-shirts and everything ready to go. And so it wouldn't have become viral. The only way it went viral was that it was just two idiots that happened to have a camera sitting on a tripod, and we turned it on one day, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's so amazing. I mean, it's almost like it was just meant to be. Things just kind of happen, and you kind of feel like, I don't know if it's pre-planned or whatever, but you just know that you just got to do it. And I love how you told a story about how it literally felt like we were in class learning about these concepts, because we don't learn this stuff in school.
Right. I had never contemplated filming the bit. I mean, I had just showed it to one person at a time, or maybe two, but I'd never like thought about making it a video. And so when we turned the camera on, I just sort of naturally realized that like that this was not a bit that worked if I laughed at my own joke along the way. So I just did it completely deadpan. And I think that helped. Because if I'd been yucking it up along the way, I don't think it would have worked quite as well. And I think that part of what made it work was that people couldn't tell whether or not I was serious, and then people got mad because they thought like I was like, one thing I got all the time was because I mean this thing at one point I counted up like 300 million views on various places, and I quit looking because I got to the point where I was finding only 5 million at a time. So out of the hundreds of millions, some of the comments that became, because it would pop up one place and another, and then there would be 1,000 comments below it, like Bro Bible or Cracked or what's that? What's the one with the keep calm and chive? The chive. And so it would or World Star or wherever, it would pop up and it would have thousands of comments. And one of the comments from somebody that was common among people that were angered by it was like, "Tell that fat cop to get back to work." And it's just kind of like you said, you thought it was you thought I was like a professor or something, but then people that looked at it a little more closely saw that I was carrying a gun, and they thought I had a pocket protector, and it was it was really my phone in my shirt pocket. But people, like I said, we didn't plan to film that. So the way I'm dressed and everything that happens in that video, that's just how I went to court that day. And I had my phone in my pocket, and I always carry a gun. So I had a gun on, and I just happened to have taken my blazer off. So like I said, if we had thought through it and tried to plan it or make it work, we wouldn't have made it work.
Absolutely. Wow. That's phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing about that, because, I as I watched it, I'm just, you can imagine, imagine the hundreds of millions of views. I mean, just imagine how there could be people watching who are saying, Dana, you are saying exactly how I've always been thinking, but I just didn't want to say it out loud. And I think that's what
yeah, I think what made it go so viral was that people saw it, and whether they had thought it and weren't willing to say it or not, I think what made it go really hyper viral was that there were pieces in it that were just too true to deny. Like, it's I think it also worked because it really goes to like the struggle to find someone that can put up with you, that you can put up with them, right? Like that's the hard part of relationships and coupling. Like there's a ton of people that I would love to hang around, like if I were not married, there's probably a ton of people that I would be like, yeah, that'd be awesome if I could hang out with her, but she wouldn't have me. And probably there's some women that would think I was cool to hang out with, but I would be like, yeah, I don't know about that, So the struggle is to find the match. And so in that 5-7 minutes, there was something that people had experienced. And so they were like, that's it. That's the thing. And so they sent it to everyone they knew. And then, you get the law of exponential growth before long.
You're right, absolutely right. And before I ask you about just some of the reactions and all that, there's so many great bits. I mean, it feels like every single part they just all kind of married together as one cohesive video. But one,
and it kind of builds.
That's right. It's the adrenaline kind of builds and all that. One my probably my favorite one really is the danger zone, because I thought of the Greek mythology, the sirens, those mythical creatures, and which very briefly to people, the sirens were basically creatures. They were half woman, half fish. They would perch on some very, very pointy rocks, and they would sing, but not because people pay tickets or anything to watch them, but they were actually very evil creatures. And what happens is that sailors would sail by and would be so distracted and they would completely lose focus and crash and drown. But I was thinking about that myth, and I was like, yes, I know it's a myth and everything, but let's be honest here. There are actual sirens out there. You could be so enamored to them, and before you know it, you're gonna go from the Greek myth sirens to the sirens on the police car that you'd be riding in with these ladies. So.
Well, every war up until the First World War was really about a woman. So, I mean, just kidding, but there were bits. I'll tell you that I happened to, after it went viral and while it was going viral, I had occasion to watch the video with many women that had never seen it. And what I learned very quickly was that if they don't at least chuckle at the first bit in the bit, the first like hint that this is not going, like this is going to be a joke, right? The first hint is that I say, well, the crazy is measured from 4 to 10, because of course there's no such thing as a woman who's not at least a 4 crazy. If they don't chuckle at that, you need to turn it off, because it's about to get a lot worse. Because if they snarl or make a face at that, you just need to bail, eject, and get away, because it's not going to get better.
Oh gosh, that must have been quite an experience, right? Just like, you're almost kind of like you're gauging their facial expressions or their reaction. That's early on, but hopefully most of these women stuck around and had quite an amazing time.
So here's the thing. So everyone that knows me in person knows that I'm a clown. So they kind of did not. They kind of knew something was up, or they'd heard about it, but they hadn't seen it. So I showed them or whatever. But anyone that knows me in person knows I'm just going somewhere to, like if I show up in a room, people are going to laugh pretty soon.
And now I want to ask you about how your family and friends reacted to this video. I don't know how many people you told them about before and after you released the video, but yeah, what was that like?
No, that's not at all how it happened. No. So James, the guy who's in the video with me, if you saw the full version, a lot of people only saw the part where I'm standing in front of a whiteboard, but the full version that we put out, there's a good friend of mine is in the very beginning, and he comes in back at the end, and he introduces me, and then I do the bit, and then he comes back on camera and he asks me a question. I do another bit. He didn't know I was going to do that second bit, but James, this was not the first time that James had played a part in a viral video. The first viral video that he played a part in is the one we call the rant video. And your listeners can go find that. But so my wife knows James and James is a client of mine. So I had kind of walked James through a little situation that developed when he made the first viral video, the rant. So, and we've told that story before, so you can go check that out on his channel or whatever. But, so but I had never showed my wife the bit at all. There was just no reason. I mean, in a couple of months, we'll have been married 30 years. Like I wasn't withholding it from her. It just never came up. So we put the video out, and honestly, we put it on James's channel, and James's channel is, like gun guys and preppers and cops and like there's kind of a small self-selected group of people that are going to be watching James's videos. So I thought, okay, there'll be 5,000 dudes, 10,000 maybe. We'll yuck it up, call it a day. That is not what happened. So before long, it had just exploded across the internet. Well, my wife had never even seen the bit. Never mind, did she know I'd ever made a video? So the thing is going nuts, and I'm starting to get calls from like the New York Times and newspapers and radio stations and TV, like network. And so my older son was about to leave for college that year, and we were home one day, and we put it up in July, and by August, it was absolutely off the charts. And he just said out loud in the living room one day, the family room, he said, "Dad, how's the video doing?" And my wife said, "Video? What video?" And I was like, so now you have to understand the context here. My wife and I have lived in the same house for 22 years. We live in a not a small town, but we live in a town where I'm pretty well known because I've been on city council for 20 years. I've coached little league and football and stuff. I'm a well-known lawyer here. So our life sort of depends upon me not being seen as a pariah. Okay. So, but there had already been some pushback coming from the video. There were people that didn't like it. And so they were sort of starting to jump up and down. So my wife is in the kitchen and she says, "Video? What video?" And I'm like, well, see, what had happened was, so I took my laptop in the kitchen and I pushed play. And I think I got to the part where I said, because of course there's no such thing as a woman who's not at least a 4 crazy. And my wife looks at me and she goes, "You have to take this down. This can't be on the internet. She already saw the pitchforks and torches coming to run us out of town." And I was like, "Oh, honey, it's way far gone. There's no taking it down. There's no getting it back. It's done." And so she watches the rest of the video. Now, keep in mind, she's never even seen the bit. Right. So never mind contemplated that I would make this incredibly viral and somewhat controversial video. So it gets to the end and she looks at me and she goes, "You are an idiot." And I go, "Okay, all right, fair." And then she goes, "But I'm a unicorn." And I was like, that is exactly why I did this video. You are indeed the original unicorn. So she's been a pretty good sport. There was, but like I said, all the judges that I practiced in front of and everything, I've been a clown for 30 years. So they weren't surprised that I was a clown with a viral video now. And they know me well enough to know that, whatever the principal complaints that people who did not know me had, they were, of course, that, he's obviously a misogynist and he should be canceled. And, the people that know me, that I deal with every day, they know better than that. It was just it's a bit, it's a joke. So, in my real life, it didn't change anything. Now on the internet, there were people who, there were people who came and put fake bad reviews on my law firm website. There were outraged, advocates for whatever my position was opposite of. I don't even know. There was one, apparently she's some kind of activist over in Australia, and I could start Twitter wars with her entire fan base and then go to bed and wake up because of course
Right.
they're like on the other side of the earth. So like I'd just send out a tweet and hashtag her into it, and I'd wake up and there'd be like 400 angry, women defending her and telling me what a pig I was. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
So it's a lot of people in the danger zone there. I think that they're inherently not realizing that they're putting
The
themselves
funny
in the
thing
danger
is,
zone.
the Australian, she was a redhead. So what am I going to do? That was the other subset of people. So there were like three main categories of people that really expressed the offense. I don't know how many people were, but I'm sure some were. But there were three categories of people who really decided that they were going to say how much offended they were. There was the category of like arch feminists who just, it wasn't funny. Nothing about it was funny. I was the problem. I was like the immediate poster boy for all things that are wrong with relations between the sexes or genders or whatever. I was, like, cancel that guy. He's a pig. So they were bent. And then there were the white knights who were just absurd. It's like telling these other women how wrong I am as a man and how you would not ever be like that to a woman is still not going to work, dude. They're still not going to pay any attention to you. And then there were the weird, the strange ones, the ones who really went ballistic, were the ones who acted as though I had spoken directly to them, as if I had made the entire video to talk to, Betty in Des Moines. Like, hey, Betty, you're in the no-go zone. And they would go on like the video, or they would go on my Facebook page or wherever they could find a place to say. And they would say, what kind of jerk are you? You're a 2. Who are you to talk about ugly women being ugly or something? And I was like,
it's crazy. Jesus.
I don't even know what to say to that. You're mad that you feel like I objectified women and denigrated women that were not attractive, which that's not what I said, but whatever. And so the response that they gave was to come and track me down and tell me I was ugly or fat or bald or stupid or short or whatever. Whatever they thought I was or wasn't. It was like, okay, you're mad because you think I said some women are ugly, and so you're going to tell me I'm ugly. That's great. Good for you.
It's pretty crazy just how I remember there's this kind of early idea for the internet where it's like, oh, we're all going to be smart because we have access to all this information and all that.
No,
didn't really work out. I mean,
can you imagine if we could have, if we were able to hop in a time machine with the magic box that I carry in my hand, and we're able to see each other, but for the purpose of the podcast, I'm holding the ubiquitous iPhone, right? The smartphone. Can you imagine if we could hop in a time machine, zip back to Philadelphia at the moment of our country being founded, and show those guys our phones and tell them, I hold in my hand the entire accumulated knowledge of humans from prehistory, everything we know about humans and the earth and space. It's all right here in my hand, and you can know anything you want in 10 seconds. And they would be like, oh my God, what do you do with it, man, from the future? And I say, mostly I take pictures of my food and argue with strangers. Can you imagine?
They'd be like,
I post pictures of my pizza, and I tell strangers that they're wrong. That's pretty much what I do.
I tell you, I that's so relatable because I really early on already tuned out of the the whole thing. Like, look what I have for breakfast. I'm like, great. The problem is I didn't get you didn't share it equally with your 1,000 followers or how many.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You and your 400 Twitter followers are not a real thing. That's right. All make believe. So
absolutely. We'll definitely touch upon social media a little bit in just a bit, but I want to now kind of bring up a couple things. The first is as we mentioned earlier, before we started recording, Dana, I found some interesting quotes from George Washington himself. Obviously, the man behind the farewell address, which is what the podcast is based on. And I guess I'll start with one that relates to family. Now, you mentioned that you've been on city council. I think this is a very relevant topic regarding community, about really the family unit. And I mean, there's so much that one can touch upon here, but the quote from Washington goes like this. He says, quote, "My mother was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. All I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to the moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her," unquote. And I read this quote because it seems like, there's a number of things that I'm concerned about. One thing I'm concerned about is the future of the family unit. We kind of look at recent history, like say from the 60s or something, the sexual revolution and all this stuff that goes on. But it seems like we're such a fragmented society. It's kind of evidence from some of those comments and the things that these weirdos say on the internet. And it's really, I love the metaphor that you put out, because it just seems like we just because we branded a smartphone doesn't mean that we're smart. We're calling this phone smart. We're not calling ourselves smart. What would you say about just kind of the state of maybe some of the fragmentation of society to some degree, like maybe in our communities, or just the way that we've maybe drifted off from the intention, the meaning, or the value of having a family unit?
If I remember my Washington right, it's kind of, I don't want to say ironic, but it's, his relationship with his mother was often fraught, if I remember right. She was sort of a stern, aloof woman, but towards the end of his life, perhaps he realized how valuable all that had been nonetheless. But I digress. The problem, I think one of the problems that we've got in our culture today is that we have been grinding away the family unit, the traditional family unit, and not replacing it with anything better. I'm not hidebound by tradition, but I think if we're going to do away with something, both intentionally and unintentionally, we probably ought to at least think about doing something better, or at least no worse. And I don't think that's happening. I think we've got way too many children in this country growing up in broken homes, growing up with too little exposure to two parents. I'm not one to tell people that they have to stay in an unhealthy relationship, of course, but I think we've made the family unit disposable and recyclable. You get one mom and one dad, and then if you're lucky, you get some other adults that will love you like their own. But those should be added on, to the people that are your parents, not added in lieu of your parents. So I think if you look at a lot of the ills that we suffer today, violence, poverty, just to name two, I think isolation, another, a lot of those have to do with the breakdown of the family unit, where you have economically driven choices, where you have two parents or maybe just one working, children that are not being mentored well or adequately, or even just insufficient amounts of time. When I was a kid, I was probably one of the, I guess, I don't know, I'm 54, so I think it may be fair to say I was probably one of the original latchkey kids. Both my parents worked outside the home. That was not something that was common in their childhood. And I think there were probably some upsides to that for my generation. And if you grew up a latchkey kid, you learned how to cook for yourself. You learned how to do things for yourself, but it also had some ramifications. And one of those is that you learned to become overly independent. Um, if you meet, and I don't know how old you are, but I know tons of people my age that don't give a flip about spending time. We're perfectly happy to be alone for a lot. And that may not be great. That may not be great news. But it's a shame that we have drifted in this direction without consciously thinking about, well, are we doing okay? Is this a good choice? We got so caught up in people's rights, individual rights and wants, that I think we lost some sense of commitment and loyalty and perseverance.
I really, really appreciate what you said. I think you're absolutely right. We've really lost that connection with that family. We kind of lose a connection to ourselves in some way. A good example, I think, would be looking at the issue of divorce. Now, I know it's a complicated issue where there's tons of reasons. One big one being money. But my father always told me that when he was growing up, and he's about the same age as you are, Dana, divorce was not a normality. It was an exception that shocked people. Like if a kid's parents were divorced, this was kind of a big deal. This was big news. And nowadays it seems like you can't go anywhere without seeing a family or someone just having their lives divided. X number of years when they promised in their vows that they would work out and be a union.
Oh, it's almost, I mean, it's just about to the point it's celebrated. I mean, as opposed, I'm not suggesting that people should be stigmatized by being divorced, but I think too many people, I do a lot of divorce work. I mean, I'm on the front lines of this divorce pandemic or endemic or whatever word we want to use. I mean, I'm in it every day. I spent all morning in the middle of the blast radius of a divorce that happened years ago and a custody fight that still lingers. And it's tragic, and it destroys people and it destroys children. And for many people, the divorce was not a better solution. It was merely an easier one that they perceived it to be easier. It turns out to be disastrous many times, but it was easier, or it looked easier. So they did it. And, there's a couple kids in that story that I was dealing with this morning that are, I didn't have anything to do with the original divorce. I've come along after, but, I not so jokingly tell people sometimes, they come to me and they say, oh, well, my husband and I, we've had a long talk and we figured it out. We already know what we want to do about custody, and we've talked through our finances, and we think we have a pretty good plan with that. We just need you to sort of do the paperwork. And I just look at him and I go, if you and your husband have figured out how to raise your kids collectively and sorted out your finances, then you should go home and stay married, because you are way ahead of a lot of people that are not getting divorced. You have figured out the two huge pieces of the puzzle. And they kind of look at me crazy. And I'm like, I'm just telling you. I mean, if you just don't love each other anymore, I get it. But, I mean, maybe, yeah, that may, I think one of the problems that we've got is that we have all been sold this idyllic soulmate nonsense, where if only you find the right person, you'll perpetually be happy. And that's just a farce. There's 8 billion people on this planet. I could probably be indefinitely happy enough with, hell, I don't know, 1 million of them as my partner. Like, there's no, if you think about, if you believe in this fantasy land that there's a soulmate, then I have bad news for you. You have just committed to the cruelest creator imaginable, because your creator put you on a planet with 8 billion people and you're playing hide and go seek looking for one. And that seems to be an absurd proposition to me. The idea that if only you look hard enough, you'll find the one. And the problem with that, of course, is that there's no such person. And more importantly, you compare any potentially compatible partner to this fantasy land of perfection, and no one will survive that scrutiny. Nobody. So, the either the stars aligned, or God made, or whatever you believe is sort of organizing the universe, or just chaos happened and random chance put you in the same elevator as the person you should spend the rest of your life with, and you measured them against your soulmate and found them wanting, so you didn't even bother to get their name. Well, so, I tell women that they've been sold the Barbie dream house, and there is no Ken. None of us are Ken. No dude I know is good enough to live in the Barbie dream house. And yet we start peddling that to girls in this country and in this culture, before they're old enough to get out of the shopping cart at Target. And it has real and profound impact.
I think you make such a great, profound point, Dana, because as I'm thinking about the systemic kind of cultural weaknesses or things that are incredibly damaging to people's ability to find someone, it just seems like in this day and age there's a lot of phoniness, for lack of a better term, and like social media, like this, like there's a mass like consumerism. There's this kind of aspect where people are thinking, oh, I have to be that perfect whatever, or I have to find that perfect. If I don't, it's the end of the world or something.
Yeah, and what you can still see, however, is that what people really crave is authenticity. Because, for example, I submit that the reason that Dave Chappelle is gangbusters successful is because Dave Chappelle says the truth out loud. And you don't have to agree with him, but you do have to respect the fact that he risks everything every night, and just says stuff that he feels and believes, and people know it's authentic. It's not a front. It's like if Dave Chappelle's entire thing is just a shtick, just a front, just a big fake thing, then he's perfected the fake authenticity. But I think what's going on with him is authenticity. And so many times the people that become, and I would say the same thing, say at the other end of the spectrum about Oprah. I don't know Oprah, but 30 years ago, she was the biggest thing on television. And I think what made her huge was the fact that people felt like they could relate to her. She could be vulnerable. She could be weak. She could be, feisty. She could be real on TV. And that was not something that people were used to at the time. And so she's reaped the rewards. And to this day, she's whether she's real or not, she is beloved for being perceived as authentic. So at the same time that people are pretending to be something that they're not, what they crave is realness.
It seems like with things like, cancel culture, you mentioned cancel culture a little bit, and just relating that also to the political correctness sort of culture that's going on. It seems like it's what's crazy about these things is that it's like a rejection of what is real.
My view of that is that people want to, at the same time that they want to relate to people that are authentic, they also want to belong to something. They want to belong to something bigger than themselves. And so, 200 years ago, if you wanted to belong to something bigger than yourself, you actually had to know human beings that lived near you. Okay. And if you had to know human beings that lived near you, then you were probably going to be accountable for the things that you said and you did. Like if you told the man in the farm a mile away that you were going to have, 5 pigs for him, you better, or else, that dude and no one else was going to deal with you anymore. So you need people, I think, have an innate urge to belong to a something bigger than themselves. And the problem is now that you can pick some tiny little sphere of belonging and manufacture it and get in it without leaving your house. And so people can like cut, copy, paste an identity from the internet and become a full-fledged voting, leading member of whatever little tiny sphere of people, pocket of the internet that they want. So like we could go find the little pocket of people who love pug dogs on the internet. And I'm sure that there's some queen and king of pug internet world, right? And if you please or displease the royalty of the internet bunch of pug people, there are consequences. But until you do, if you ingratiate yourself with them, then you can sit in your house and be a welcome member of whatever. Okay. And so this cancel culture thing just enables people to do a couple things simultaneously. One, they get to belong to something that's bigger than themselves, right? So like next week, there's going to be a cancel some dude or some woman because they said or did something that this group found offensive. So there's going to be a dog pile of people, seeing who can shout down the evil person the loudest, and they will gain credentials and credibility and gravitas in their little group of people that they'll never actually meet in person. They also get to feel like they did something, right? Like instead of like actually doing something, they get to claim credit for doing something. So it's like this microwave shortcut to meaningfulness. And unfortunately, it's ersatz. It's not, you didn't actually do anything. When you were the 4,000th person to sign the change.org petition, the world did not change. But you got to pat yourself on the back and release those endorphins and feel like you did something. And then you got to go back to your little forum and tell them that you did something, where your fake internet, persona resides. So I think it's a terribly unhealthy world that's been enabled by the technology. We are not evolved as creatures to manage the technology that we've created for ourselves. We're just not.
Yes, and it seems like a lot of what you're saying, Dana, is something that the social media companies know, because they know that if they can stimulate, I can't remember the part of the brain that is stimulated by confirmation bias and tribalism and all that, but it seems like there's the whole mechanism there that they can say if this can happen to the average person, we can almost mass produce the demand for something like this.
Well, so if you, I think you're right. And if you just want to run a little experiment, I did this, and this is kind of odd coming from a guy who became internet famous, but I started asking myself, because, with that internet fame came some some baggage and some weird stuff, right? Like people I didn't know reaching out to me and, all kinds of, if 300 million people see your video, a significant number of them are either insane or malevolent or ambitious or manipulative or whatever. And they'll find you in whatever. So it took me a while to realize that, good Lord, I just treated anyone that came at me on the internet like they'd stop me on the sidewalk. I was nice enough to them. And then, I'd be like, oh, sure. Yeah. I'm a lawyer. I answer questions, I was like, and then sometimes they turned out to be weirdos, and I was like, oh, that's weird. So I'd have to shut that down and walk off, figuratively speaking. But here's the experiment that I decided to run on myself, and my results were conclusive. I thought, well, if I'm spending, let's say 15 hours a week on social media, that's probably low at the time. Maybe I'm spending 30. I don't know. It's easy to pile up if you're honest about record keeping, right? Let's just say 15 hours a week. And I thought, well, would my life be better if instead of spending 15 hours a week on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, to name three, would my life be better if I took those 15 hours and reallocated them to reading a book, walking my dogs, talking to my wife, sleeping? Well, obviously the answer is yes, right? I mean, it can't be no. It's an emphatic, well, that seems obvious, right? So I said, I'm going to do it. So I shut it all down and I got away from it. And I did reallocate most of that same time to something productive, you know. But what I didn't realize was that the 15 hours of, or whatever, 15 or 30 or however many minutes and hours it really was, in the absence of that, what also happened was that my diet, my intake and consumption of negative emotions diminished to nearly none. So when I cut out Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, with those three being gone, what also was gone was schadenfreude, contempt, lust, greed, envy, you know, all kinds of negative emotions that were being just completely like overhyped by way of social media. And so I found that it wasn't the fact that I was reading and talking to my wife and walking around the block and practicing law and sleeping more that was making my life better. It was the fact that I wasn't experiencing schadenfreude, contempt, lust, greed, envy, and every other negative emotion constantly. So I'd have been way better off to just take the same 15 hours and sit in a dark closet and do nothing. Never mind actually go do something worth doing. And I don't know anyone that, if they're honest with themselves, wouldn't find out the same thing if they did it themselves.
Yes, I'm so concerned about, how this is going to affect, future generations. Now, I don't know what the next technology is. It just seems like it comes. You make a great point about how it's kind of thrust upon the human population.
I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's going to be a further distortion of reality. Like what, I don't know, like holograms or virtual reality or whatever the next technological quantum leap is going to be. I do know this. It will be a distortion of reality, a more extreme and pervasive distortion of reality.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that'll wrap up part 1 of episode 82 with Dana McLendon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation so far. While we may not know the next technology, we definitely know that there is a part 2, which is down in the show notes below. Make sure to check that out. I really appreciate you all listening to part 1, and we'll be back shortly with part 2.